The Science Fair by Vernor Vinge, originally published in the number 9 edition of Damon Knight's Orbit Anthologies in 1971, which was republished twice the next year. In 2001, it appeared in The Collected Stories of Vernor Vinge, this one also being republished the following year, as well as getting a couple of renamed European translations, the German being called The Depths of Time, and the Italian called All the Stories. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. The Science Fair. My offices are under the tidal wave breaker wall. I know, that's an unsavory and unsafe part of Newton. I was trapped there once for 3 tides after a really large earthquake smashed the wall and laid several tons of rubble over the walk down to my rooms. On the other hand, having my offices there gives prospective clients the deliciously naughty feeling that they're dealing with the underworld. Then, when they see how solidly luxurious my offices are, they think that besides being a sinister figure, I am also a successful one. When the girl knocked on my door, I was deep asleep on the pallet behind my desk. Considering how much money I spend on those rooms, I can't afford to sleep anywhere else. I staggered up and walked to the door, swearing at myself for having let my receptionist go 3 tides earlier. For obvious reasons, there isn't much market for industrial spies during the science fair. Even the city police corporation relaxes during the fair, so I couldn't guess who my visitor might be. I opened the door. Vision of visions. Large, soft eyes looked at me over a pertly turned nose and full, moist lips. Her satiny skin glowed a deep, even infra, marking out firm, ripe curves. There was a lot to see, since her only clothing was a brief pair of rear leggings. She was young and nervous. "You are Leandru Ingiarchis Bevo Ingiarchis?" I smiled. "To the wide world, yes, but you may call me Indruska." She stepped inside. "Why do you keep it so dark in here?" I wasn't about to tell her that she'd caught the master industrial spy asleep, so I lowered my head and ogled up at her. "The maiden glow of your skin is more than sufficient light for me." She blushed, bright infra from her shoulders up, and tried to sound tough when she said, "See here, Ingiarchis, it's unpleasant enough to do business with someone of your sort. Please don't make it any worse by starting immoral advances." "Just as you say, milady." I turned on the lights and crossed to the other side of the desk. "Now, how may I serve you?" She lowered herself delicately onto a visitor's pallet. "My name is Yelen Dragnor Bevo Science Fair Committee." She produced the appropriate identification badge. "Are you any relation to the chief scientist of the House of Gron?" She nodded. "Baeling Dragnor Bevo Gron is my father." "Indeed, I am honored. I understand he is to give the popular lecture at the fair next tide. You must be very proud." She came to her knees, her brittle mask of sophistication cracking. "I am proud, very, but scared too. We, the Science Fair Committee, that is, know the princes of Gron will murder father rather than let him speak at the fair." I tried not to seem incredulous. I've never heard of any polity willing to risk its own dissolution merely to eliminate one scientist. "What does your father know that could be so distressing to the House of Gron?" "I don't know. I don't know. Father won't tell the committee. Of course, that's only proper since his research is Gron property until the fair actually begins. But he won't give us even a hint. The princes have tried to kill him once already, and we just have to find someone to protect him. And so you came to me." Yes, the fair committee knows your reputation. They're willing to pay you well, up to 256 acres of prime farmland. All you have to do is guard father till next tide. The committee can protect him after that when he gives his talk. Will you do that? The fair committee must have known a lot about my reputation, considering the nubile creature they had sent with their proposition. I reached across the table and gently brushed the tears from her neck. Don't worry, Lenska. I'll do what I can. It's really not terribly difficult to outsmart the princes of Gran. Besides, I still didn't believe they'd try something so stupid as assassinating a scientist on the eve of the science fair. She perked up considerably at this and provided me with the particular information I would need to do the job. By the time she left, she was almost cheerful. She had met the big, bad spy and found that while he was big, he wasn't so awfully bad. At the top of the ramp, she turned and looked down at me, her face a pale infra smudge against the sky. I promised to be at her father's apartment in less than half an hour. She wagged her rear and was gone. I've lived in more than a few cities, but Newton by the Sea will always be my favorite. I know Benobles and Easthofen have their points. They're old, they're rich, and the ground underlying them is so stable that their buildings rise 6, 7, even 8 stories. But the snow in Benobles is more than 3 stories deep. It's so cold there that the city would be pitch dark without its street lamps, and Easthofen may have some great gambling houses, but it's a 2-hour steam sledge ride from the present ice harbor to the old city. Personally, I'd rather live where I can keep my hooves warm. That's easy to do in Newton. Just north of the city, Mount Hefty pours a 64-foot wide stream of incandescent red lava into the sea. At high tide, the water meets the molten rock just beyond the North Sea wall, and a veil of steam rises far up over the city, casting an infraglow down upon it. Along the coast, south of the lava flow, the water is delightfully warm, and the beaches are smooth and sandy. At the moment, I couldn't see any of this. It was low tide, and the lava met the sea several miles out. The steam generated was a faint gleam over my left shoulder, too far away to light my surroundings. If it hadn't been for the street lamps, the only light would have been the bright splinters of red from half-shuttered windows and the deep infraglow of occasional passers-by. From my hiding place behind an ornamental deep-root tree, I inspected my surroundings. This was a luxurious section of town, not far from the fairgrounds. The electric street lamps cast long shadows up the sides of the apartment buildings that faced both sides of the street. Some of those buildings were 3, even 4 stories tall, constructed pyramid fashion so that the top floor had only a quarter the area of the first. Silk petal vines gleamed dark and glossy against their carven walls, the pollen making the air heavy and sweet. Except for the faraway hiss of lava changing water into steam, all was quiet. The party in the building across the street had ended more than an hour ago, and by now the revelers were departed. No one had come down the street past my hiding place for nearly 8 minutes. That's another nice thing about Newton. Its citizens are generally asleep during the low tides, when things are darkest out. That makes things a lot easier for people like me. I rose up off my rear and tried to get the cramps out of my legs. Even here in Newton, stakeouts are an uncomfortable bore. After about 4 hours on a job like this, even my hand torch and automatic pistol began to feel awfully heavy. As usual, I was wearing a body mask that covered everything but my eyes and nose. The mask is heavy and hot, but my skin glow is virtually invisible when I have it on. For the umpteenth time, I scanned up and down the street. No activity. And that 4th-floor window, the window to Baeling Dragnor's apartment, was still dark. This whole job was just a false alarm, I complained to myself. The science fair committee had let itself be taken in by the paranoid ravings of a senile scientist. I had been employed against the princes of Gron before, and I knew they were brutal, but their brutality was not irrational or self-destructive. There was only one science fair in each generation. In the time between fairs, a Gron researcher was practically Gron property, and his research results were as secret as Gron counterespionage could keep them. What prince would risk such a cozy situation just to prevent one scientist from talking at the fair? Just then, the street lamps went dim, slowly cooled to the point of invisibility. So much for my theories. Even the few lights left in the apartments went out. The Beauvau Gron must have struck a power substation at least. We have a simile in Newton. Dark as the sky at low tide. Believe me, there are few things darker. And now, without street lamps, the sky's darkness was everywhere. I couldn't see the pistol I held in my hand. I stood very still and strained my ears. If this job were properly orchestrated, the Beauvau Gron should be moving in now. I did hear something, a faint creaking. It seemed to come from the direction of Dragnor's apartment. I couldn't be sure, though. Even at low tide, the hiss of boiling seawater is loud enough to blur sharp hearing. I looked into the sky. Nothing. What in Guy's name was going on? The only tiling that could hover in the air so quietly was a balloon, but a balloon's air heater would have been too bright to look at. Even if they managed to shield the heater, there's no way they could stop the gas bag from glowing without making the whole contraption too heavy to fly, and I couldn't see even a shimmer. I reached over my back and slid my hand torch out of its pocket. Using it would be a last resort, since it would make me a much better target than anyone else. Several minutes passed. The creaking was unmistakable now, and I could hear body movements, too. If the Beauvau Gron were trying to involve Dragnor in a simulated accident, they would have to act fast, and I'd have to be faster to stop them. Gee, I was going to have to use my torch after all. Then, as it has so often in the past, the Ingiarchus family luck came through for me. The skies parted momentarily and the stars shone down on Newton. If you're from Benobles, maybe this doesn't seem so unusual. But here on the coast, we're lucky if the sky clears once in a horning. There must have been 64s of stars, harsh, uncompromising points of light that burned in infra, red, and orange. Even at high tide, the sky above Newton is rarely so bright as it was during those few seconds. The assassins were using a balloon. Its starlit hulk floated 256 feet above the street. 3 men hung on slings beneath it. They were less than 64 feet up now and were closing in on Dragnor's window. They must have had guts to try something like that. Aiming through a clear spot in the branches above me, I fired at the balloon, but I fired wide. I guess I'm just naturally big-hearted. 64 feet is a long way to fall. I shouldn't have bothered. The Beauvau Gron recovered from their star-struck surprise and rained fire down on me in my little tree. Splinters of wood flew in all directions as their rockets exploded. They had the high ground with a vengeance. So much for charity. My second shot was aimed for the balloon. The target was just too high up, though. My rocket missed it by at least 8 feet. But he who flies hydrogen-filled balloons must be prepared to pay the price. The bottom of the gas bag exploded as my rocket passed under it, and in seconds the entire aircraft was engulfed by fire and thunder. The ropes to 2 of the assassins were severed instantly, and they fell to the street. Splash! The third fellow rappelled madly downward. He almost made it, being only 16 feet above the street when his ropes burned through. As I ran out from what was left of my concealment, flaming debris was still falling out of the sky. I stopped briefly by the corpse of the one who had fallen from 16 feet. The man was a Beauvau Grand, all right. His body mask had all insignia removed, but the cut of the cloth was familiar. What did this Dragnor have on the House of Grand, anyway? The fairgrounds are near the western edge of Newton, on a gently sloping terrace facing the sea. For 15 out of 16 bornings, the grounds are unused except for theaters, which contract with the city for the use of the land. But once in every generation, tents cover the grounds and even sprawl into adjacent properties. A bonfire is set on the crest line west of the grounds, and by its glow the tents reflect every color you can imagine, no matter what the time of tide. And so the science fair is begun. In one tent you can see the most recent improvements in steam turbines, while in the next the latest techniques in podiatry are demonstrated, or a lecture in antibody reactions is in progress. The variety is nigh endless. The crowd trying to squeeze into the main lecture tent was unbelievably large, and it took all my powers of infiltration to get to the tent's entrance. There, the fair official badge I had been given was put to good use. I was searched and then admitted. They were virtually sitting on each other's backs inside. I knew the fair's popular lecture usually lives up to its name, but this was incredible. Even the name Beoling Dragnor wouldn't ordinarily draw like this. Apparently, the people of Newton knew the scientist would report on something spectacular. What could it be? Telegraphy without wires? Perhaps a method of predicting earthquakes. Dragnor had never been pinned down to a single field, so it was hard to guess. Doubly so for those who knew that Grand had tried to silence him. I used my badge to reach the reserved pallets set right before the stage. Yelena Dragnor had already arrived. I squeezed in beside her, slipped my arm across her shoulders. "Surprise, dear Lenska. Despite immense and perilous difficulties, I've delivered your father safe and sound to the Speaker's subcommittee." She wiggled delightedly, then remembered that she was the daughter of a researcher and I was a poor freeman. She said, "We are most grateful, Sir Leandru." Her eyes said much more. I glanced down the row of pallets. The pavilion was brightly lit, and the costumes of the various personages in our special section gleamed and glittered in 8 colors. At the end of the row sat the 3 official representatives of the House of Grand. They were dressed in ruffled pants and overcapes checkered bright orange and medium infra, the Grand colors. The one in the middle was Thork Grand Beauvau Grand, reputed to be the master of the House of Grand. At the moment, that individual had the look of a frustrated creditor. His pale eyes swept back and forth across the stage, occasionally rested on me. It was notice I could do without. The stage was empty except for a small console set to one side. This increased the mystery, since what is science without gadgetry? I didn't have a chance to wonder on the question further, for just then attention sounded and the speaker walked on the stage. Beoling Dragnor was an old man. He had lost much of his hair, and his splotchily colored skin revealed poor circulation. He reached center stage, turned, and looked down upon us. For a long moment, the loudest sound was the sea 3 miles away. "Good tide." The voice was cracked and squeaking, but not weak, not timorous. "My name is now Beoling Dragnor Beauvau Science Fair Committee. Before this fair I served the House of Grand in Benobles." He nodded stiffly to the princes of Grand in the first row below him. "In at least one respect, Benobles is a superior city. The skies are clear there more often than any other city of my acquaintance. On the average, the stars are visible more than 1 hour in every 64. I have observed and studied them for more than a generation." A ripple of disappointment spread through the audience. Except for the discovery of the moon and its connection with the tides, astronomy had always seemed a singularly useless field. But Dragnor continued his slow discourse.
We know very little about the stars. Many generations ago, Shlomenes Onasio proposed that they are worlds similar to our own, but much hotter, so hot that their surfaces are covered with glowing magma. Even now, this is the best theory we have, though modern physics still can't justify all the details. Over the generations, a number of people have studied the stars from binobles. I've used their observations to arrange the lamps which light this lecture pavilion. If you're sitting near the center of the pavilion, the relative positions and luminosities of these lamps will appear very much as did the 16 brightest stars in the sky's fifth octant, 64 generations ago.
Dragnor nodded to a technician who sat by the console at the side of the stage.
The stars are probably the most stable features in our universe. In this case, a simple change of one rheostat will demonstrate how the stars appeared 32 generations ago.
The technician fiddled, and one of the lamps shone several times brighter. I squinted over my shoulder at the light. All the other stars were ordinary heat lamps, but this variable one was actually an electric arc stopped down to low power.
And finally the sky as it appears at present.
The same star became yet brighter, till it was the brightest of all the stars in the display. The effect was not lost on the audience. An unhappy murmuring rose behind us. Old Dragnor seemed unperturbed. After all, he presumably knew what was coming.
You have noticed that one particular star has waxed. In a technical lecture to be given later, I will offer evidence that this increased brightness is not intrinsic, but is due entirely to the motion of the star.
He paused, let the audience guess where the talk was going. When he spoke again, it was with seeming irrelevance.
The city of Benobles is connected to the rest of the world by its steam sledge traffic. When it is not too cold, I enjoy going to one of the outer sledge terminals to watch the express approach town. At first, all you can see of the sledge is its tiny headlight glowing in the far away. The light grows brighter and brighter, but it does not move left or right, up or down. At the last moment, when the light is brightest, it slides to one side as the express whips past the siding and goes on into the center of town. Until 15 mornings ago, the waxing star represented above had no measurable proper motion. Then, shortly after the last science fair, I succeeded in measuring its motion. The drift is small, less than a minute of arc during all the time I have observed it, but more than large enough for me to predict the future position of the star.
The murmuring around us was louder, more anxious. Thork Gron clenched and unclenched his hands, all the while glaring at Dragnor. The scientist continued.
I'll reserve the details of my calculations for a technical lecture. At this time, I will content myself with showing you our sky as it will appear only a few generations from now.
The science fair technician must have turned that arc light up to full. I shut my eyes, but the glare seemed to go right through the eyelids. Every inch of exposed skin felt as though it were being flayed. Old Dragnor's calm voice went on.
The waxing star's closest approach to Gi will occur just 8 generations from now. At that time, the star will be many times brighter than the representation hung above us here. For 256 tides, it will glow so brightly and then slowly fade as it passes on by us.
The arc lamp was turned down till it was merely a very bright light. I opened my eyes and looked around. Lenska Dragnor sagged against my side, her face hidden behind her hands. The audience seemed wilted, almost hypnotized. At the far end of our row, Thork Gron looked as though he were gathering himself up to pounce onto the stage.
My lords, do you know what this close passage will do to our world? I do not. Our ignorance is immense. Our instruments are crude. Within the range of error of my estimates, the waxing star might burn away our oceans. Failing that, it could easily melt the glaciers and drown us all. Our only hope for certain survival is the development of a science and a technology to meet the challenge. To achieve this, we must abolish all proprietary rights to inventions and discoveries. This science fair must be declared permanent.
The crowd's dazed silence lasted only a moment. Then there was pandemonium. Half the noblemen and corporate chairmen in the pavilion were on their hooves, shouting. It was hard to blame them. They sank much of their resources into research, and now someone was suggesting that they give away the fruits of those endeavors. For that matter, where did Dragnor's suggestion put me? If all research were public knowledge, what use would there be for an industrial spy? I had to pull Lenska back down onto her pallet as Thork Gron Bavogron scrambled on stage and pushed Dragnor to one side. If the old man were not safe with his secret told, he would never be. The Prince of Gron raced back and forth along the edge of the platform, shouting at the top of his lungs. I couldn't hear a word. Behind us, the city folk and the scientists pushed and jostled one another as various factions tried to approach the stage. For them, Dragnor's revelation far outshone the question of extending the fair, and their shouted questions and speculations drowned out everything else. Still, I doubt if a single one of them guessed that the waxing star was not nearly so important as what was near it.